Before Egypt, before Babylon, before history was even written, there was Sumer. Over 5,000 years ago, the Sumerians built the world's first cities, invented writing, and laid the foundation of civilization as we know it, but then they vanished. Exclamation mark, how could the most advanced civilization of its time collapse so suddenly? Exclamation mark, why did their knowledge disappear for thousands of years? Exclamation mark, and is it possible that we've been taught a version of history that hides the truth? What happened in ancient Mesopotamia wasn't just the rise of cities. It was the rise of everything, and its fall may hold secrets we were never meant to uncover. The forgotten origin of human civilization starts right here. Hey guys, tonight we are traveling back over 6,000 years to a place that shouldn't exist. We're standing in a sweltering, flat, unforgiving landscape of mud and reeds, a place baked by a relentless sun and torn apart by violent, unpredictable floods. Yet right here, in this impossibly hostile environment, humanity decided to build its very first cities, invent writing, and lay the foundations for the world as we know it. This is the story of the Sumerians. And let's be honest, if you were dropped here with nothing but the clothes on your back, you probably wouldn't survive the first week. The heat would get you, or the floods, or a scorpion in your boot. It was a brutal world, but one that forced a kind of desperate genius into existence. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. It's a huge help. And for fun, post your location and what time it is where you are in the comments. It's always cool to see where everyone is tuning in from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Imagine you are standing barefoot. The ground beneath your feet isn't sand. Not exactly. It's a fine silty clay, baked by the sun into a cracked, pale brown shell. In the distance, the heat shimmers, making the horizon dance and wobble. There are no hills, no mountains, no forest to offer shade or perspective. Just a vast, featureless plain stretching out in every direction, punctuated only by towering green reeds that rustle like whispers in the hot, dry wind. The air is thick, heavy with the smell of stagnant water, dust, and something faintly tar-like. This is southern Mesopotamia, the land that the ancient Greeks would later name the land between the rivers. A very practical, if not particularly poetic, name for this place. You're standing between the two legendary rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates. But they aren't the gentle, majestic waterways you might picture from a history book. These rivers are wild, chaotic, and utterly untamed. For much of the year, they are your lifeline, the only reliable source of water in this parched world. But they are fickle, friends. Without warning, fed by snowmelt from mountains hundreds of miles away in Anatolia, they can transform into raging torrents. They don't just gently overspill their banks. They explode across the flat landscape, erasing everything in their path in a churning brown wave of destruction. One day you're tending your small patch of barley, the next your home and everything you own is under 6 feet of muddy water. These floods are the central, terrifying, and life-giving reality of this place. They bring destruction, but they also deposit that rich, silty soil, the very stuff now caked on your feet, that makes agriculture possible in the first place. The challenge, you realize, is monumental. How do you survive, let alone build something permanent, in a place that's actively trying to wash you away? You have almost no natural resources in the conventional sense. There's no stone for building, no timber for beams, and no metals to be found anywhere. If you wanted to build a sturdy house, you couldn't just go chop down a tree or quarry some rock. It simply wasn't there. All you have is the dirt under your feet, the reeds rustling in the marshes, and the water from those two profoundly unhelpful rivers. It's like being asked to build a skyscraper with nothing but mud pies and drinking straws. And yet, look closer. The people here, the very earliest settlers, are starting to figure it out. You see them gathering the clay, mixing it with water and chopped reeds for strength, and packing it into simple rectangular molds. They leave these mud bricks to bake in the relentless sun until they are hard as stone. With these, they can build walls, houses, and granaries. You see others poling flat-bottomed boats, woven skillfully from the giant reeds through the shallow marshlands. The reeds are everything. They are the framework for their huts, the fuel for their fires, the material for their baskets and mats. And here's a quirky little tidbit. As you walk, you might notice sticky black pools of a substance seeping up from the ground. It's bitumen, a natural asphalt. The settlers quickly discovered this goo was a perfect waterproof sealant. They could coat their reed boats with it, use it as mortar for their mud bricks, and even use it to fix tool heads onto handles. They were using the few resources they had with an ingenuity born of pure necessity. But who were these first people? Historians still argue whether the people who first figured all this out were the Sumerians themselves, or a mysterious preceding group sometimes called the Ubadians. Were the Sumerians migrants who arrive in this land with new ideas, or did their culture evolve directly from these original marsh-dwelling innovators? The evidence is buried under millennia of river silt, leaving us with a tantalizing question. Who was the first person to look at this hostile, muddy floodplain and think, yeah, I could build a civilization here? Whoever they were bold. They began to dig, not just small ditches, but a network of canals, a web of man-made streams designed to control the lifeblood of this land. They were learning to tame the chaos, to divert the floodwaters, to irrigate the dry land, and to turn the rivers from agents of destruction into partners in creation. It was the first great battle between humanity and nature, fought with shovels made of clay and stone. This titanic effort of water management, of irrigation, was the single most important development that allowed everything else to happen. It was this control that would allow for surplus food, and surplus food is the fuel of civilization. It frees people up to do things other than just finding their next meal. It allows for priests and kings and artisans and eventually writers. And all of it started here with the simple backbreaking work of digging in the mud under a punishing sun. That backbreaking work of digging canals or redirecting the wild rivers pays off. For the first time, there's a degree of predictability in this chaotic land. With a reliable water supply for your crops and a bit of protection from the floods, you can do something remarkable. You can stay put. You can build a home that you don't expect to be washed away next season. And as you travel through this network of man-made waterways, you see settlements taking shape. But one in particular seems different. It feels older, more significant. Even from a distance, you can see a structure at its center that rises slightly above the flat horizon. This is Eridu. According to the Sumerians themselves, writing thousands of years later, this was ground zero. This wasn't just a city, it was the city. In their grand cosmic story, after the world was created, the gods decided to build a place for themselves on Earth, and they chose this very spot. The god Enki, the clever and crafty master of water, magic, and creation, was said to have founded Eridu personally. A later text, the Sumerian king list, puts it plainly, after the kingship descended from heaven, the kingship was in Eridu. So, in the Sumerian mind, civilization wasn't a human invention at all. It was a gift handed down from the heavens right here. This king list is a fascinating document, part history and part pure myth. It lists the first kings of Eridu as ruling for reigns that make no earthly sense. One for 28,800 years, his successor for 36,000. It's a quirky and wonderful insight into how they saw their own distant past. A golden age when gods or godlike kings walked the earth and laid the foundations of their world. Of course, the gods apparently did the initial construction and then left humanity to handle the maintenance, which seems about right. When archaeologists began excavating the mound at the site of Eridu in the mid-20th century, they found something that, in its own way, was just as stunning. They didn't find proof of gods building a city, but they did find the very process of a holy place coming into being. At the lowest, earliest level of excavation, they uncovered the remains of the very first temple. And it was It was a simple, single-room building of mud brick, barely larger than a modern garden shed. A tiny sanctuary, likely with a small altar for offerings. But this was the seed. Here's where it gets truly amazing. When that first little temple eventually weathered and began to crumble, the people of Eridu didn't tear it down and clear the site. Instead, they treated the ground as sacred. They carefully filled in the old structure and built a new, slightly larger and more elaborate temple directly on top of the old one's foundations. Think of it like a never-ending divine renovation project. Temple 1.0 was replaced by Temple 2.0, which was bigger and had better features. Then came 3.0 and 4.0, and so on. This process was repeated over and over for more than 1,000 years. Archaeologists have identified at least 18 distinct layers of temples built on this one sacred spot, each one grander than the last. This layering created a man-made mound, a hill called a tell, that gradually lifted the temple higher and higher towards the heavens, making it the most prominent landmark for miles around. You approach this sacred mound. Even in its early stages, it's the center of everything. It's not just a building, it's an idea. It's the focal point of the community's spiritual and economic life. You can smell the incense burning, a sweet and smoky scent cutting through the usual smell of mud and marsh. You hear the low hum of chanting from priests, their voices carrying on the still air. Farmers from the surrounding fields bring a portion of their barley harvest, the first and best of the crop, as an offering to the gods who they believe made the whole thing possible. Fishermen leave a share of their catch. These aren't just gestures of faith. They are the beginnings of an economy. The temple becomes a central storehouse, a bank, and a redistribution center. It takes in the community's surplus and, in theory, uses it to support the priests, maintain the canals, and help feed people in times of famine. But this raises a question that historians still argue over. Archaeologists and historians debate whether Eridu can truly be called a city in its earliest phases, or if it was more of a ceremonial center. Was it a bustling town with a diverse population of artisans, merchants, and laborers living there full-time? Or was it a smaller, permanent settlement of priests and temple staff, which swelled with pilgrims from nearby villages during major religious festivals? The truth is likely somewhere in between. It was the sacred heart of the region, the place you went to connect with the divine, a kind of permanent festival ground. It established the fundamental blueprint for a Sumerian city, a god at its heart, housed in a temple that dominated the skyline. It was the ultimate real estate mantra: location, location, location. Even if that location is a swamp, as long as a god lives there, people will come. Eridu proved the concept. It showed that a community could be organized around a shared belief, anchored by a physical structure. But it was still just the beginning. The seed had been planted, but it would be in another city where it would truly, explosively blossom into the world's first urban jungle. Leaving the spiritual quiet of Eridu behind, you pull your reed boat north along the Euphrates. The landscape remains the same flat expanse of green marsh and brown earth, but something on the horizon begins to change. It's not a single mound anymore. It's a smudge, a low-lying silhouette of human activity on a scale you can't quite comprehend. As you get closer, the smudge resolves into definite shapes, massive walls, and not just one, but two towering temple mounts. The gentle hum of Eridu is replaced by a low, powerful roar, the sound of tens of thousands of people living together. This isn't a town. This is a monster. This is Uruk. If Eridu was a prototype, Uruk is the supercharged, mass-produced final model. The city is a sprawling, chaotic explosion of life. You ditch your boat and approach on foot, and the first thing that strikes you is the wall. Not just a token barrier, but a formidable defensive rampart of baked mud brick, said to have been built by a legendary king you'll meet later. The wall stretches for over 6 miles, enclosing an area of more than 2 square miles. To put that in perspective, this is a city in the 4th millennium BCE that is bigger than ancient Athens would be at its classical peak, and larger than Rome was for much of its history. This isn't just growth. It's a phenomenon. You pass through one of the city gates, and the change is instantaneous and overwhelming. The relative peace of the open plain vanishes, swallowed by a wave of sound and smell and humanity. The streets are not wide, planned boulevards. They are narrow, twisting, unpaved alleyways that snake between mud brick houses packed together like cells in a beehive. There's no zoning committee in Uruk. A potter's kiln, belching black smoke, sits right next to a family home, which is next to a pen of bleeding goats, which is next to a tavern spilling noisy patrons into the lane. You have to constantly watch your step to avoid piles of refuse, sleeping dogs, and children chasing each other underfoot. It's vibrant, it's alive, and it stinks. Let's be honest, the sanitation system consists of throwing your trash into the street. It's a miracle plagues didn't wipe the whole place out. Or maybe they did, and they just rebuilt. This is the world's first experience with urban density, and it changes everything. In your small village, you knew everyone. Here, you are surrounded by thousands of strangers. You are anonymous, a single face in a vast crowd. This is both liberating and terrifying. New rules, both spoken and unspoken, are needed to function. You push through the throng, following the flow of the crowd, which seems to be moving towards the city's heart. Looking up, you can see the reason for the city's 2 great temple mounts. On one, dedicated to Anu, the god of the sky, is a striking temple, its walls whitewashed with gypsum plaster so that it gleams in the sun. This is the famous White Temple, a beacon visible for miles across the plain. On the other side of the city rises the even larger Iana district, a sprawling complex of temples, courtyards, and workshops dedicated to the city's patron deity, the powerful goddess of love and war, Inanna. These are no longer the humble chapels of early Eridu. These are ziggurats, massive stepped platforms made of millions of mud bricks, lifting the temples toward the sky, a visible statement of the city's wealth and its devotion to its gods. This incredible growth leads to a fascinating historical fact. At its peak around 2900 BCE, Uruk was home to an estimated 50,000 to 80,000 people, making it by far the largest city on Earth. Why this happened is a matter of intense scholarly debate. Historians still argue whether this explosion was driven by a push or a pull. Was there a period of climate change that dried up the surrounding pasture lands, pushing rural populations into the city for the security of its irrigated fields and granaries? Or was it the pull of the city itself, the new opportunities for work, the safety of the walls, the excitement and cultural vibrancy of this new way of life that drew people in from the countryside? It was likely a combination of both, a perfect storm that created the world's first true metropolis. As you wander, you notice something odd. All around the construction sites and workshops, you see piles of identical, crudely made clay bowls. They are rough, undecorated, and clearly mass-produced in a hurry. These are bevel-rimmed bowls, one of the most common and puzzling artifacts of the Uruk period. A quirky tidbit is that archaeologists believe these were the world's first disposable food containers. The prevailing theory is that they were used as standardized ration bowls for the thousands of laborers working on the city's monumental projects. You'd work your shift hauling mud bricks for the ziggurat, and at the end of the day, you'd be given your payment, a bevel-rimmed bowl filled with a set portion of grain or stew. It was a standardized wage, a prehistoric paycheck. You could eat out of it and then just toss it. Functional, efficient, and entirely impersonal, the perfect symbol of the new, bureaucratic way of life. The sheer scale of Uruk presents a brand new problem. How do the temple administrators keep track of all this? How do they record the thousands of bowls of grain paid to workers, the hundreds of sheep brought as offerings, the vast quantities of beer, wool, and pottery stored in the temple warehouses? Memory is no longer enough. The old ways are failing under the weight of this new complexity. A system is needed. A way to record, to count, to manage. Standing here, in the shadow of the great ziggurat, amidst the noise and the crowds, you can feel the immense pressure building. A pressure that is about to lead to the single most important invention in human history. You follow a robed temple official as he pushes his way through the chaotic streets of Uruk, heading for the relative order of the Yanat Temple District. He carries a small, damp, pillow-shaped tablet of clay in one hand and a sharpened reed stylus in the other. He disappears into a storeroom, a vast, cool, dark chamber lined with immense pottery jars filled with barley, dates, and oil. Your eyes adjust to the gloom, and you see them everywhere. Hundreds, maybe thousands, of these little clay tablets, neatly stacked on wooden shelves. Some are small, like the one the official carried. Others are larger, like ancient ledgers. This is the city's memory bank. The official walks to a shelf holding a row of identical tablets. He quickly finds the one he's looking for, makes a few new marks on his fresh tablet, and places it next to the others. He's just recorded a transaction. Perhaps a withdrawal of grain rations for a crew of canal diggers, or the arrival of a flock of sheep from a temple-owned farm. It's mundane, bureaucratic, and utterly revolutionary. What you're witnessing is the birth of writing. Like didn't begin with poetry or epic stories about kings. It began with accounting. It started, as most things do, with a practical problem, keeping track of stuff. The earliest forms of this new technology weren't even really writing. They were pictographs. If you wanted to record 5 sheep, you would draw a simple picture of a sheep's head and then make 5 marks. A stalk of barley represented grain. A stylized head with an open mouth represented a person or a ration. It was simple, intuitive, and effective for basic bookkeeping. You can see these early pictographic tablets, some of the first ever created, right here in the temple archives. The problem with pictographs, you quickly realize, is that they are limited. How do you draw love or anger? How do you record a person's name, like in Merkur? You can't draw a picture of a name. This is where the Sumerian scribes made a stunning intellectual leap, a moment of pure genius. They realized that the symbol could represent not just the thing it looked like, but the sound of the word for that thing. This is the rebus principle, and it's the key that unlocks true writing. Think of it like this in English. If you wanted to write the word belief, you could draw a picture of a bee and a picture of a leaf. Bee leaf. It's a bit of a silly game for us, but for the Sumerians, this idea, the phonetic use of signs, was world-changing. The Sumerian word for arrow was tia. The Sumerian word for life was also pronounced tia. A scribe, wanting to write the abstract concept of life, realized he could simply draw the pictograph for arrow. Anyone reading it would know from the context that he didn't mean a physical arrow, but the sound ti, and therefore the concept of life. This was the moment writing broke free from just representing objects and started representing spoken language itself. Historians still argue about the precise timeline and catalyst for this leap from pictograph to phonetic script, but it happened right here, in the storerooms and scribal schools of Uruk. As this new system developed, it also changed physically. Drawing curved pictures in wet clay with a sharp reed is slow and messy. The clay clumps and pulls. Scribes discovered that it was much faster and cleaner to press the triangular tip of the reed stylus into the clay, creating small, wedge-shaped marks. Instead of drawing a circle for a sheep's head, you would combine a few quick wedge presses that had the same meaning. This new style of writing is what we call cuneiform, from the Latin cuneus, meaning wedge. This is a mainstream historical fact. The evolution from pictographs to the abstract, wedge-shaped cuneiform script took several centuries, becoming a versatile system capable of recording laws, letters, treaties, and eventually literature. You watch a young boy, a student scribe, practicing his craft. His master dictates, and the boy painstakingly presses his stylus into a soft clay tablet. It's a difficult skill to learn. There are hundreds of signs to memorize, each with multiple possible meanings and phonetic values. The schooling is rigorous, probably involving a lot of caning for mistakes, a common disciplinary tool mentioned in their own texts. A quirky detail of their education system is a text we found called School Days, which is basically a long complaint written from a student's perspective about how much he hates school. He gripes about his teachers, the difficulty of the lessons, and getting beaten for everything from sloppy handwriting to talking in class. It's strangely relatable, a 4,000-year-old reminder that some things never change. He dreams of becoming a powerful scribe, one of the elite few who hold the keys to this powerful new technology. Literacy was not for everyone. It was a specialized profession, a source of immense power and prestige. Scribes were the engine room of the Sumerian state. They were the accountants, the administrators, the lawyers, the diplomats. They ran the city. Without them, the complex machinery of Uruk, its ration system, its trade networks, its monumental construction projects, would grind to a halt. The invention of writing didn't just allow them to record what was happening. It allowed them to organize and command on a scale never before imagined. It was the ultimate tool of administration. But this new tool wouldn't just be used for counting sheep and barley. It would soon be used to record the names of kings, the deeds of heroes, and the stories of the terrifying, capricious beings they believed controlled their world. With the ability to write comes the ability to define, to give names, personalities, and stories to the unseen forces that govern your life. Standing in the great courtyard of the Yana Temple in Uruk, you feel the raw, palpable power of belief. The air is thick with the smoke of juniper and cedar, offerings burned to please the gods. You are not just in a city, you are on divine property, a guest in the home of the immortals, and you'd better be on your best behavior. The Sumerian worldview is not a comforting one. Their gods are not gentle, loving shepherds of humanity. They are powerful, immortal, and dangerously human-like in their flaws. They are prone to jealousy, vanity, rage, and pettiness. They bicker amongst themselves, they hold grudges, and they view humanity primarily as a workforce, created for the sole purpose of serving them and keeping them supplied with food, drink, and flattery. In the Sumerian creation myth, the gods grow tired of doing their own work, digging canals, farming the land, so they create lesser beings, humans, to be their slaves. It's a sobering thought. Your entire existence is a divine labor-saving scheme. The top of this celestial hierarchy is the sky god Anu, the distant and somewhat aloof chairman of the board. He resides in the highest heaven and rarely meddles in human affairs directly. More immediate and influential is Enlil, the god of wind, air, and storms. Enlil is a powerhouse, the enforcer of the divine will, but he's also notoriously bad-tempered. It was Enlil, in a fit of pique at how noisy humanity had become, who decided to wipe them all out with the Great Flood, a story that will sound very familiar to many. He's the god you desperately want to keep happy, because his anger can manifest as a destructive storm or a devastating plague. Then there is Enki, sometimes called Ea by later peoples, the god of Eridu, master of the sweet waters, wisdom, and magic. He is the clever one, the trickster, the divine inventor. Crucially, he is also a friend to humanity. In the flood story, it's Enki who secretly warns a righteous man named Usadra, the Sumerian Noah, to build a boat and save himself, his family, and pairs of animals, thus preserving life on earth against the wishes of the grumpy Enlil. Sumerian myths are full of tales of Enki's clever solutions and narrow escapes. He's the god you go to when you have a problem. And here in Uruk, the most important deity is the city's patron, the formidable goddess Inanna, later known as Ishtar. She is a goddess of dazzling contradictions, the goddess of love, beauty, and sensuality, but also the goddess of war, conflict, and political power. She is ambitious, passionate, and utterly ruthless in pursuit of what she wants. One minute she's the seductive goddess of the bedchamber, the next she's a roaring lioness on the battlefield, rejoicing in the carnage of war. Her complexity makes her one of the most compelling figures in the ancient world. You can almost feel her presence here in her temple district, a place that is both a center of sacred rites and a hub of immense political and economic power. A mainstream historical fact is the sheer number of deities in the Sumerian pantheon. While a few great gods like Enlil and Enki dominated the major myths, there were hundreds, if not thousands, of lesser deities. There was a god for brickmaking, a goddess for beer brewing, Ninkasi, a very important figure, a god for the door hinge, and even a deity responsible for latrines. Every aspect of life was overseen by a divine entity that needed to be acknowledged and appeased. It's a world humming with unseen powers. Keeping these demanding gods happy is a full-time job for the entire community. This is the purpose of the ziggurat and the temple complex. It's a machine for worship. You watch as a procession of priests, clad in white linen, leads a prize bull, its horns gilded, towards a sacrificial altar. The bellowing of the animal echoes in the courtyard. Offerings of bread, cakes, honey, and beer are laid out on offering tables. The Sumerians believed that the gods literally consumed the essence of these offerings. This daily ritual was essential. If the offerings stopped, the gods would go hungry, and if the gods went hungry, they would get angry. And when they got angry, floods, famine, and disease would surely follow. The fate of the city hangs on this relentless cycle of appeasement. Historians still argue about the nature of the relationship between the Sumerian people and their gods. Was it one of pure, terrified obedience? Or was there a more personal, transactional element to it? Some texts suggest a kind of bargaining. A person might pray to a god, promising a certain offering if the god would grant them a favor, healthy children, a successful business trip, or recovery from an illness. It was a religion based less on faith and more on contract. As you stand in the temple courtyard, you notice something unusual. In a quiet corner, a priest is examining the liver of a sacrificed sheep. He holds it up to the light, looking intently at its shape, color, and markings. This is a form of divination, a quirky but central practice called hepatoscopy. The Sumerians believed that the liver was the seed of life and emotion, and that the gods would write messages about the future on the livers of sacrificial animals. A blemish here might mean the king will fall ill. A strange formation there might predict an enemy attack. They created detailed clay models of sheep livers, covering cuneiform inscriptions as textbooks for apprentice diviners, mapping out what every possible marking could mean. The will of the gods wasn't just a matter of prayer. It was a science, a code that could be read by experts in the entrails of a dead animal. It's a stark reminder that in this world, survival depends not just on hard work, but on knowing what the powerful, terrifying, and easily annoyed gods are planning next. Leaving the grand, imposing world of the gods and priests, you slip back into the narrow, sun-baked alleys of the city. What was life actually like for the average person in Uruk, someone who wasn't a king or a scribe? You peek into the open doorway of a typical Sumerian house. It's a simple one-story structure made of those ubiquitous sun-dried mud bricks, with a flat roof where the family would sleep on hot nights. The house is built around a central open-air courtyard, which provides light and ventilation, a small private patch of sky in the dense urban landscape. The rooms leading off the courtyard are small and dark. The furniture is sparse and functional, reed mats for sleeping, a few low wooden stools, and some pottery for cooking and storage. In one corner, a woman sits on the floor, grinding barley between two stones to make flour for the day's bread. Her arms are strong from the repetitive, strenuous work. The air inside is cooler than the street, but smells of wood smoke, sweat, and cooking grains. It's a life with very few material possessions by our standards. Wealth is measured not in gadgets, but in goats, jars of oil, and a secure supply of food. Your average Sumerian, let's call him Baba, probably doesn't own this house. He likely rents it from the temple or from a wealthy landowner. His day starts at sunrise. If he's a farmer, he walks several miles out of the city to the temple-owned fields where he works as a tenant farmer, cultivating barley and dates and maintaining the vital irrigation canals. He'll be paid for his labor in rations, grain, wool, and most importantly, beer. If he's a craftsman, say a potter or a weaver, he might work in a small workshop attached to his house or in a larger, state-run enterprise organized by the temple. He's part of a complex economic system, but he's very much a cog in the machine. For lunch, he doesn't pop into a cafe. He eats a simple meal of coarse, flat barley bread, a handful of dates, and perhaps some onions or lentils. The centerpiece of his diet, however, isn't bread, but beer. This is a crucial historical fact. Beer was not a luxury item in ancient Sumer. It was a fundamental staple of their diet and their economy. It was a source of calories, nutrients, and because the water used to make it was boiled, it was much safer to drink than the often contaminated water from the canals. Ninkasi, the goddess of beer, was a very popular deity for a reason. Sumerian beer was thick, soupy, and porridge-like, full of barley mash. They drank it out of large communal jars through long reed straws, designed to bypass the floating chunks of bread and grain. So yes, your average Sumerian was probably slightly buzzed for a good portion of the day. It might have made the back-breaking labor a little more tolerable. In the afternoon, Baba continues his work under the hot sun. Life is governed by the seasons and the demands of the agricultural cycle. There's the spring planting, the summer growing season spent endlessly weeding and managing the irrigation channels, and the autumn harvest, a period of intense communal labor. There are no weekends, no paid holidays in the modern sense. Time off comes in the form of religious festivals, which are frequent but are still, in their own way, a duty to the gods. One of the quirky things about daily life is their approach to medicine. If Baba gets sick, he has two options. He can go to the ASU, a physician who practices a kind of empirical medicine. The ASU might create a poultice of plants and minerals, or prescribe a specific herbal remedy. We have tablets listing these prescriptions, which read like strange recipes. Grind up a turtle shell, mix with bitumen and strong beer, and have the patient drink it. It sounds like a joke from a bad sitcom, but this was cutting-edge medical science. His other option is the Ashipu, a sort of exorcist or magical healer. The Ashipu believes the illness is caused by a demon or a curse sent by an angry god. His cure involves incantations, rituals, and magic charms to drive the evil spirit out. For most Sumerians, you'd probably hedge your bets and visit both. You'd drink the turtle shell beer from the ASU, while the Ashipu chanted a spell over you. Can't hurt to cover all your bases. Historians still argue about the degree of social mobility in Sumerian society. Was a person like Baba, the son of a farmer, destined to be a farmer for his entire life? Or could a clever and ambitious individual rise through the ranks? The existence of scribal schools suggests that a path to advancement through education was possible, at least for some boys. But for the vast majority, life was likely dictated by the status of their family. Society was clearly stratified. At the top were the powerful priests and, increasingly, a new class of secular leaders and wealthy landowners. Below them were the scribes, artisans, and merchants. The broad base of the pyramid was made up of farmers, laborers, and fishermen. And at the very bottom were the slaves. Slavery was a fact of life, often the result of being captured in war or falling into debt. A person could sell their spouse or children into slavery to pay off a debt, a grim testament to the harsh economic realities of the time. As the sun begins to set, casting long shadows across the city, your Baba returns home, tired and dusty. He shares his evening meal with his family as the cooking fire casts a warm glow in the courtyard. They might share stories or maybe just sit in exhausted silence. Life is hard, repetitive, and precarious. A flood, a drought, or a plague could shatter their fragile existence at any moment. Yet there's a resilience here, a toughness. They are part of a massive, thriving community, the first of its kind. They are pioneers of urban living, figuring it out one dusty, beer-fueled day at a time. And as they work, another revolutionary invention is quietly beginning to transform their world, not with wedges on clay, but with a simple circle. As you continue to explore the bustling workshops of Uruk, you hear a sound that is somehow both new and familiar, a low, grinding rumble, accompanied by the squeak of wood on wood. You follow the sound into a potter's quarter and find the source. A man sits before a lump of wet clay, but instead of laboriously pinching and coiling it by hand, he has it centered on a heavy, flat, spinning disc of clay or wood. With a kick of his foot, he sends the disc spinning, and as it turns, he uses his hands to effortlessly pull the clay upward and outward, shaping it into a perfectly symmetrical jar in a matter of moments. This is the potter's wheel, one of the first and most profound applications of a revolutionary new idea. The invention of the wheel is one of those monumental moments in human history that feels almost elemental, as if it were inevitable. But it wasn't. For millennia, humanity moved things by dragging them, or by using logs as rollers. A mainstream historical fact is that the first evidence for the wheel vehicle doesn't appear until relatively late in the grand scheme of things, around 3500 BCE, right here in Mesopotamia and roughly concurrently in other parts of Eurasia. And surprisingly, its first use wasn't for transportation. It was for pottery. The potter's wheel, which you're watching in action, was a game changer for craftsmanship. It allowed for the rapid mass production of high-quality, standardized pottery. No longer was every pot a unique, hand-built object. Now, a skilled potter could churn out dozens of identical bowls, jars, and cups in a single day. This is what made those disposable bevel-rimmed bowls you saw earlier possible. It was a leap in manufacturing efficiency as significant as the assembly line would be thousands of years later. The city's storerooms could be filled with uniform containers, making storage and transport of goods like grain and oil far more systematic. But the true genius was in taking that horizontal potter's wheel, tipping it on its side, and putting an axle through the middle. You step out of the pottery workshop and into a wider thoroughfare near the city walls. Here, you see the next stage of the revolution in motion. A farmer is loading sacks of barley onto a crude, solid-wheeled cart pulled by a pair of oxen. The wheels aren't spoked marvels of engineering. They are heavy, solid discs of wood, probably made from 3 planks clamped together and rounded off. They wobble and creak, and the whole contraption looks incredibly cumbersome. It's not fast, and it's not nimble, but it allows 1 man and 2 animals to transport a load that would have taken 10 people to carry. This changes the very geography of the economy. Before the cart, a farm had to be very close to the city or a waterway to be viable. Transporting a harvest overland for more than a few miles was simply too labor-intensive. Now, with the ox-drawn cart, the agricultural hinterland of the city can expand dramatically. Farmers can cultivate land further away, confident that they can get their surplus grain to the temple granaries in Uruk. The city can draw on a much larger area for its food supply, fueling its continued growth. Raw materials like bitumen, or the scarce wood that had to be hauled from foothills miles away, could now be transported more easily. The wheel was, quite literally, expanding their world. Of course, with any new technology, it doesn't take long for people to figure out how to use it for warfare. In the king's stables, you see craftsmen building a more specialized type of vehicle, the war chariot. These early Sumerian chariots are not the light, speedy, spoked-wheel chariots of later empires like Egypt or the Hittites. They are heavy four-wheeled wagons, more like battle cars drawn by four onagers, a type of wild as they had domesticated. A quirky tidbit is that horses had not yet been introduced to the region, so they had to make do with these notoriously stubborn and bad-tempered onagers. Trying to get a team of four wild asses to pull in the same direction must have been a daily exercise in frustration. It's like trying to herd cats, but the cats can kick you into next week. Despite their clumsiness, these battle wagons were a terrifying new weapon. They would have been used as mobile missile platforms, thundering towards enemy infantry lines while a warrior standing in the back hurled javelins or spears. They weren't fast enough for flanking maneuvers, but their sheer noise, weight, and momentum would have been a massive psychological shock to foot soldiers. It was the birth of mechanized warfare. The simple circle, first used to shake clay, was now being used to project power and crush enemies. The debate among scholars here isn't about who invented the wheel, as evidence points to a near-simultaneous emergence in several places. Instead, historians still argue over the primary driver of its adoption. Was it the economic pull of needing to transport agricultural goods more efficiently? Or was it the military push of city-states seeking an advantage over their rivals? The evidence for both appears at roughly the same time, suggesting that the two were deeply intertwined. A city that could feed itself better could support more soldiers, and an army with chariots could better protect the trade routes and farmland that fed the city. Technology, economics, and warfare were locked in a cycle of mutual reinforcement. You watch as the ox cart rumbles slowly out of the city gate, its solid wooden wheels leaving deep ruts in the dusty road. It's a simple, powerful image of progress. This invention, born from a potter's tool, is fundamentally altering the concepts of distance, trade, and power. It's enabling the city to grow larger, its economy to become more complex, and its armies more formidable. But this growing complexity and power is also creating new tensions within the city itself. The temple has been the center of life for centuries, but now a new power is rising, one that wants control of those armies and the wealth the wheel is helping to create. The palace is about to challenge the temple for the soul of the city. For centuries, the ziggurat has been the undisputed center of gravity in every Sumerian city. It's the tallest building, the spiritual heart, and the economic engine all in one. The high priest, or Ensi, was the most powerful man in town. He was the god's chief administrator, the steward of the divine estate that was the city itself. His power wasn't personal. It came directly from the god he served. He lived within the temple complex, and his authority was wrapped in the sacred ancient traditions of sacrifice and ritual. But now, as you walk through the city, you notice a new and competing center of power is under construction. It's a large, sprawling complex, but it isn't built on a sacred mound reaching for the heavens. It's a fortified, earthly building designed for defense and administration. This is the palace. This development marks a fundamental shift in the very concept of power. The old system was theological. The city belongs to the god, and the priest manages it on the god's behalf. But as cities like Uruk grew wealthier and more powerful, they also attracted more conflict. Disputes with neighboring cities over water rights, the most precious resource of all, and fertile land became more frequent and more violent. In these times of crisis, you don't necessarily need a priest who can perform the correct ritual. You need a warrior who can lead an army. This is where a new title emerges, the Lugal. The word literally means great man. A Lugal was initially a temporary war leader, chosen for his military prowess to lead the city's army in a specific conflict. The idea was that once the threat was dealt with, he would step down and power would revert entirely to the temple and its NC. But power, once tasted, is rarely given up so easily. It's like hiring a very effective, very aggressive contractor to fix your house, and when the job is done, he decides he likes the place and isn't leaving. These successful war leaders began to argue that the city needed a permanent defender, a full-time great man to ensure its security. They established their own households, separate from the temple, which grew into the first palaces. They used their military authority to claim their own lands, often territory captured in war, and to levy their own taxes to support a standing army of loyal soldiers. A new secular institution was born, standing in direct competition with the ancient authority of the temple. This created a tense and delicate balance of power, a kind of celestial turf war played out on earth. The priests in the temple still controlled the city's spiritual life and a vast portion of its economy. They were the landlords of the gods, and the gods, they would remind everyone, were the ultimate owners of everything. The Lugal and his palace controlled the army and the instruments of force. A mainstream historical fact is this very division. Early Sumerian society was dominated by the temple, but by the middle of the 3rd millennium BCE, a clear political structure known as the palace-temple state had emerged, with these two institutions often vying for supremacy. You can see this rivalry in the art and propaganda of the time. On ancient cylinder seals and stone carvings, you see the NC depicted in his role as a pious servant of the gods, shown leading religious processions or feeding sacred flocks. His power is derivative, granted from above. But on a monument like the famous Stele of the Vultures, you see the Lugal of the city of Lagash portrayed very differently. He's shown as a massive figure, towering over his own soldiers and his enemies. He is the active, dominant hero, the one who personally smites the city's foes. A quirky tidbit of this royal propaganda is how the king is always depicted as physically larger than everyone else around him. It's not because Sumerian kings were all giants. It was a visual metaphor for their immense power and importance, the great man shown as a literal great man. This inevitably leads to a fundamental question over which scholars continue to debate. Was the rise of the Lugal a hostile takeover or a gradual partnership? Did these early kings violently usurp the authority of the priests, stripping the temples of their land and power? Or was it a more symbiotic evolution, where the two institutions realized they needed each other? The temple provided the divine legitimacy. The gods had to approve of the king, after all, and the palace provided the military security the temple needed to protect its vast agricultural holdings. In some cities, the roles may have even merged, with the Lugal also taking on the sacred duties of the NC. In others, they remained separate and deeply suspicious rivals, like two corporate headquarters built across the street from each other, constantly poaching each other's talent and resources. You stand in a plaza midway between the gleaming white ziggurat and the thick mud brick walls of the new palace. You can feel the city's energy being pulled in two different directions. On one side, the smell of incense, the sound of ancient chants, the promise of divine favor. On the other, the clang of hammers on bronze, the bark of a captain drilling his spearmen, the promise of earthly security and power. The average Sumerian is caught in the middle. Do you pay your taxes to the temple or the palace? Who is your ultimate master? The god who owns the land or the king who defends it? This internal struggle for control, for the city's wealth, its land, its people, and its very soul, defines this new era of Sumerian history. And it is this new breed of powerful, ambitious kings, the Lugals, who will now step onto the stage as legendary figures, their deeds and adventures immortalized in the new medium of writing. The title of Lugal is no longer just a temporary job description for a war chief. It has become a hereditary kingship, a dynasty. And no king embodies the transition from historical ruler to mythological hero better than the most famous Lugal of them all, Gilgamesh, king of Uruk. His name echoes through the city, spoken with a mixture of awe and fear. He is the one credited with building the city's massive walls you saw when you first arrived, a monumental feat of engineering and labor. As you walk the streets of his Uruk, you hear the stories. At first, they are not of a benevolent ruler. The people whisper that Gilgamesh is a tyrant. He is arrogant, powerful, and driven by his whims. He is 2/3 god and 1/3 man, a lineage that makes him overwhelmingly strong but also tragically mortal. The legends say he exercises a dark version of a ruler's privilege, claiming the right to sleep with every new bride on her wedding night. He is a king out of control, his immense energy turned against his own people. The citizens of Uruk cry out to the gods for relief from their oppressive king. The gods, in their wisdom, decide to solve the problem not by punishing Gilgamesh directly, but by creating a counterweight, a rival who can match his strength and absorb his wild energy. They create Enkidu, a wild man born in the wilderness. Enkidu is the polar opposite of the urban Gilgamesh. He lives with the animals, running with the gazelles, his body covered in hair. He is pure nature, untamed and innocent of civilization's ways. He is eventually lured to Uruk by a temple prostitute named Shamhat, in a famous part of the story that celebrates the civilizing power of sexuality, good food, and beer. When the civilized Enkidu finally arrives in Uruk, he is appalled by Gilgamesh's tyranny and blocks the king's path on his way to a wedding. The two men, the king of the city and the man of the wild, clash in the city square. They wrestle, a titanic struggle that shakes the doorposts of the surrounding buildings. They are perfectly matched in strength. But in the end, Gilgamesh manages to throw Enkidu. In that moment of defeat, something shifts. Instead of anger, there is mutual respect. They recognize themselves in each other. Their rivalry instantly transforms into a deep and abiding friendship. They embrace, and the two strongest men in the world become inseparable companions. Now Gilgamesh's boundless energy has a new, constructive outlet. He and Enkidu decide they need to make a name for themselves by embarking on a great adventure. They resolve to travel to the legendary Cedar Forest, a distant, sacred land guarded by a terrifying monster named Humbaba, and cut down the sacred trees to bring the precious timber back to Uruk. This is the central historical truth embedded in the myth, the desperate need for resources. Sumer, as you know, had no good timber. A king who could secure a supply of massive cedar logs for building temples and palaces would be a hero indeed. A quest for resources is a primary driver of politics and war. The story of their journey and their battle with Humbaba is a masterpiece of epic storytelling. Humbaba is a horrifying creature. His roar is the flood, his breath is fire, and his face is a swirling mass of intestines. Yet, together, Gilgamesh and Enkidu manage to defeat him. They return to Uruk in triumph, with rafts of cedar logs floating down the Euphrates behind them. Gilgamesh has channeled his energy, and with his friend has brought great wealth and glory to his city. He is no longer just a tyrant. He is a hero. His fame attracts the attention of the goddess Inanna, the patron of Uruk. Smitten by his beauty and power, she proposes marriage. But Gilgamesh, in a moment of incredible hubris, brutally rejects her, listing all her previous lovers and the terrible fates that befell them. This is a quirky and telling detail. Even the great King Gilgamesh sees that getting romantically involved with a powerful, fickle goddess is a terrible idea. It's the ancient equivalent of it's not you, it's me, but also you turn your boyfriends into spiders. Inanna is furious at the rejection. She goes to her father, the sky god Anu, and demands he unleash the bull of heaven to destroy Uruk. The bull descends and wreaks havoc, but once again, Gilgamesh and Enkidu fight together and slay the beast. This, however, is an act of defiance too far. They have killed two of the god's servants. The great gods meet in council and decree that one of the two heroes must die. They choose Enkidu. Enkidu falls sick with a divine illness, and after days of suffering, he dies. The death of his friend shatters Gilgamesh. He is confronted for the first time with a terror greater than any monster, the finality of death. He weeps for Enkidu for 7 days and nights, refusing to let him be buried until a maggot falls from his nose. This grief propels Gilgamesh on a new, desperate quest, the search for immortality. He sheds his royal robes and wanders the wilderness, terrified of his own mortality. He seeks out Ziusidra, called Utnapishtim in this version of the story, the survivor of the Great Flood, who was granted eternal life by the gods. The journey is long and arduous, pushing Gilgamesh to the ends of the earth. But when he finally finds Utnapishtim, the answer he receives is crushing. Immortality was a one-time gift. It's not on offer anymore. The fate of humanity is to die. There is no escape. Utnapishtim gives him a final, faint hope, a magical plant at the bottom of the sea that can restore youth. Gilgamesh successfully retrieves the plant, but in a moment of carelessness on his journey home, a snake steals it, sheds its skin, and becomes young again. Gilgamesh returns to Uruk, empty-handed and exhausted. He has failed. But as he stands before his city, he looks at the massive, magnificent walls he built, the very first thing he was famous for. And in that moment, he finally finds a different kind of immortality. He may die, but the great city he built, the work of his hands, will live on. It is a profound and mature conclusion. True immortality is not in living forever, but in the legacy you leave behind. Was Gilgamesh a real person? This is a question historians have long debated, but the consensus is yes. The Sumerian king list mentions a Gilgamesh of Uruk ruling around 2700 BCE. He was likely a powerful and influential king, famous for building the city walls. Over centuries, his historical deeds were embellished, woven together with myths and legends, until a man became an epic hero. His story a deep exploration of what it means to be human. The heroic age of individual kings like Gilgamesh gives way to a period of intense rivalry between flourishing city-states. Uruk is no longer the only major player on the Mesopotamian stage. Cities like Kish, Lagash, and Umma have grown powerful, each ruled by its own Lugal, each convinced of its own divine mandate. But another city, a bit further south, is about to reveal a secret that will dazzle the world and give us an unparalleled and somewhat disturbing glimpse into the wealth and ritual of this competitive age. You travel now to the city of Ur. Ur has a long and storied history, but around 2600 to 2500 BCE, it enters a period of incredible prosperity, known as its first dynasty. As you approach, you see its mighty ziggurat dedicated to the moon god Nana, the city's patron deity. The port of Ur is bustling with boats, as it has a more favorable position closer to the Persian Gulf, making it a crucial hub for trade. Merchants import copper from Oman, lapis lazuli from the distant mountains of Afghanistan, and carnelian from the Indus Valley. This influx of exotic goods and immense wealth is funding a new level of royal splendor. But the full extent of this splendor would remain hidden, buried in the sand, until the 1920s. Let's fast forward for a moment. In 1922, the world was captivated by the discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb in Egypt. But at that very same time, a British archaeologist named Sir Leonard Woolley was conducting excavations at Ur. He began to uncover a vast cemetery, but in one area he found something unique: 16 tombs, far grander than the thousands of simple pit graves around them. They were multi-chambered structures, built of brick and stone, a rarity in Sumer, deep beneath the ground. He called them the royal tombs of Ur. Let's go back in time and witness what Woolley would later uncover. You stand at the edge of a huge, open pit, a ramp leading down into the darkness of a freshly sealed tomb. The air is heavy with the scent of death and extravagant offerings. This is the tomb of a king, or more likely, a powerful queen of Uruk named Pwabi. Her name and title, Nin or Eresh, a word that can mean both queen and high priestess, are inscribed on a cylinder seal found with her remains. Inside this tomb, the wealth is simply staggering. It's a treasure trove that rivals King Tut's. You see exquisite headdresses made of beaten gold leaves, willow branches, and flowers, intricately crafted and laid over the queen's skull. There are rings, earrings, and necklaces of gold and lapis lazuli, a deep blue stone more precious than gold to the Sumerians. There's a stunning cape made of thousands of gold, carnelian, and lapis beads, rest-rung by archaeologists into its original pattern. You see lyres and harps, their wooden frames long decayed, but their sound boxes decorated with magnificent golden bulls' heads with beards of pure lapis. One of the most famous objects is the ram in a thicket, a small, breathtaking sculpture of a goat standing on its hind legs, peering through golden foliage, its fleece made of shell, and its horns of lapis lazuli. This is a mainstream historical fact. The artistry and craftsmanship discovered in the royal tombs of Uruk demonstrated a level of wealth and sophistication previously unimagined for this period. But as your eyes adjust to the scene, you notice something else. Something deeply unsettling. Queen Pwabi is not alone. Lying in neat rows around her burial chamber, and along the ramp leading into the tomb, are the bodies of dozens of other people. These are not signs of a battle or a massacre. They are arranged in perfect, orderly positions. There are soldiers in full regalia, with copper helmets and spears, lying near the entrance as if still on guard. There are female attendants, still wearing their own lavish jewelry of gold and carnelian. There are musicians, their fingers resting on the strings of their magnificent harps. Oxen are still yoked to the wagons that brought the queen's funeral treasures into the tomb. What happened here? This is the most shocking secret of the royal tombs. These people were not killed violently. Forensic analysis suggests they died from poison, likely a potent sedative. They seem to have gone to their deaths willingly. Near each body, Woolley found a small clay or metal cup. The current theory is that these attendants, courtiers, soldiers, and servants participated in a solemn funeral ritual. They marched into the tomb as part of a grand procession, drank a cup of poison, lay down in their designated places, and composed themselves for death, joining their queen in the afterlife. One tomb, the Great Death Pit, contained the bodies of 74 such attendants. This discovery of mass human sacrifice on such a scale was utterly unexpected and remains a source of scholarly debate. Historians still argue over the meaning of this ritual. Was it a demonstration of the queen's ultimate power, that her authority extended even beyond the grave? Or was it an act of profound devotion, a belief that these attendants were necessary for the queen to maintain her royal lifestyle in the next world? Or was it something else entirely? A quirky and rather grim tidbit is that this practice seems to have been short-lived. We don't find this kind of elaborate mass burial in later periods of Mesopotamian history. It seems to have been a specific and rather extreme ritual practice that you are during this very wealthy and competitive period. Perhaps it was just too costly, or perhaps later rulers decided that living servants were more useful than dead ones. It's like a fad diet that's incredibly effective but has the unfortunate side effect of killing everyone who tries it. It probably wasn't going to last. Standing at the edge of this silent, buried scene, you were confronted with a brutal reality that lay beneath the glittering gold and lapis lazuli. The immense wealth and artistic achievement of Uruk's first dynasty were built on a social structure that demanded the ultimate sacrifice from its people. This wasn't a hero's quest like Gilgamesh's. It was a cold, calculated display of power. It's a reminder that the splendor of these ancient cities often came at a terrifying human cost. And the same competitive spirit that led to these lavish burials was also playing out on the battlefields between the city-states in a constant grinding struggle for land, water, and dominance. The opulent, Ritualized death inside the tombs of Ur is a reflection of the deadly seriousness of life outside them. The period following the Age of Gilgamesh and the first dynasty of Ur is not one of peaceful cooperation. It's a chaotic and violent free-for-all, a time known as the early dynastic period. The Sumerian heartland is a patchwork of a dozen or more independent city-states, each fiercely protective of its territory and its honor, all packed together in a relatively small area. Imagine a dozen rival high schools all sharing one football field and one water fountain, and you get a sense of the potential for conflict. You find yourself marching in a column of soldiers, kicking up the pale dust of the plain. You are a soldier from the city of Lagash. Your armor is simple, a pointed copper helmet and a heavy woolen cloak studded with metal discs for protection. Your weapon is a long spear with a bronze head, and you carry a large rectangular shield. Beside you marches the rest of the phalanx, a tightly packed formation of spearmen, shields overlapping to form a solid wall of wood and metal. This disciplined formation is a Sumerian innovation designed for shock combat on the open plain. Ahead of you, the heavy onager-pulled battle wagons you saw earlier rumble forward, creating a cloud of dust and a terrifying noise. Your enemy today is the army of Umma, your city's northern neighbor and bitter rival. The reason for this war, like so many others, is a strip of fertile agricultural land that lies between the two cities. It's a territory called the Gudian, or the edge of the plain. For generations, Lagash and Umma have fought over this land. Treaties have been signed, boundary stones erected, and solemn oaths sworn to the gods, but the conflict always reignites. Water rights are at the heart of it. An irrigation canal crucial to both cities runs through this territory. Diverting even a small amount of its water can mean the difference between a bountiful harvest and a famine. So you march to war for a few square miles of mud and a ditch full of water. It is quite literally a matter of life and death for your city. The battle, when it comes, is brutal and straightforward. There's not a lot of clever maneuvering. The two phalanxes march towards each other across the flat plain. The chariots make their initial pass, hurling javelins to disrupt the enemy formation. Then the two shield walls collide with a sickening crunch of metal, wood, and bone. It's a shoving match, a gruesome grind of stabbing spears and crushing shields. The goal is to break the enemy's formation. Once a phalanx shatters, it's no longer an army. It's a mob of terrified individuals who can be run down and slaughtered. A crucial historical fact from this period comes from a single, extraordinary artifact, the Stele of the Vultures. This monument, erected by King Enigma of Lagash around 2500 BCE, commemorates his victory over Umma in one of these very battles for the Gudian. It's one of the world's first historical documents, a piece of royal propaganda carved in stone. On one side, it shows the historical narrative. You see Enigma leading his phalanx, the soldiers marching in perfect formation over the dead bodies of their enemies. In another panel, vultures fly overhead, carrying the severed heads and limbs of the defeated soldiers of Umma, a gruesome detail that gives the stele its name. On the other side, it shows the mythological justification. The great god of Lagash, Ningirsu, is depicted as a giant, holding a massive net filled with the tiny, captured soldiers of Umma. The message is clear. Our victory wasn't just a feat of arms. It was the will of our God. But victory is fleeting. Enigma of Lagash might win today, but in a generation, a new level of Umma will rise, tear down the despised boundary stone, and the whole bloody cycle will begin again. This state of endemic warfare had a profound effect on Sumerian society. It accelerated the rise of the Lugal and the palace, as military leadership became paramount. It spurred technological innovation, not just in weapons like the phalanx and the chariot, but also in metallurgy, as cities needed skilled smiths to produce more and better bronze. A quirky detail that highlights the back-and-forth nature of these conflicts is the sheer number of times these cities sacked each other. We have records of Uruk being destroyed and rebuilt multiple times. A later king of Lagash, Uruk, tried to enact a series of social reforms, curbing the power of the priests and protecting the poor from exploitation. He is sometimes hailed as the creator of the first liberty laws. But his noble experiment was cut short when Lugalzajizi, the ambitious king of Umma, attacked and destroyed Lagash, burning its temples and carrying off its wealth. Uruk reforms couldn't save him from a stronger army. Historians still debate the ultimate impact of this constant internecine warfare. Was it a fatal flaw in Sumerian civilization, a self-inflicted wound that weakened them and left them vulnerable to outside invaders? Or was this hyper-competitive environment the very engine of their innovation? Did the constant pressure of war force them to become better organized, more technologically advanced, and more economically efficient? Perhaps the competition that led to the glories of Uruk and the Epic of Gilgamesh was the same competition that led to the endless, bloody grind on the plains between Lagash and Umma. The Sumerian cities were like a group of brilliant, quarrelsome siblings, whose intense rivalry pushed them to great heights of achievement, but also prevented them from ever truly uniting. This disunity, this inability to stop fighting each other over the same patch of dirt, was a fatal weakness. Because while the Sumerian cities were busy squabbling amongst themselves, a new power was rising just to the north. An individual was coming who didn't think in terms of conquering a single city or controlling one canal. He had a revolutionary new idea: to conquer all of them. The age of the city-state was about to end, brought down by the world's first emperor. The constant drone of Sumerian cities warring against each other creates a kind of background noise to your journey. You've seen the pattern. Lagash fights Umma, Umma fights Uruk, Uruk fights Kish. It's a violent, predictable cycle. But now a new sound cuts through the noise. It comes from the north, from the region of Akkad, a place where the people speak a different language, a Semitic tongue, not the unique, isolated language of the Sumerians. And the sound is the marching of a new kind of army, led by a man with a new kind of ambition. His name is Sargon. His story, like that of many great founders, is shrouded in legend. The legend of Sargon text, written long after his death, tells a story that will sound incredibly familiar. He was born in secret, his mother a high priestess who couldn't acknowledge him. She placed him in a basket of reeds, sealed it with bitumen, that same useful black goo you saw from the very beginning, and set him adrift on the Euphrates River. He was found by a humble gardener, who raised him as his own son. It's a classic hidden prince narrative, a story designed to give a mysterious and divinely favored origin to a man who, in reality, probably came from a much more ordinary background. A mainstream historical fact is that Sargon was not of royal Sumerian blood. He was an outsider, a self-made man, in the most ruthless sense of the term. His early career was as a cupbearer to the king of Kish, one of the most powerful Sumerian cities. This was not a menial job. The cupbearer was a trusted, high-ranking official, privy to all the court secrets. From this position, Sargon learned the intricacies of Sumerian politics and the weaknesses of the city-state system. He saw their endless rivalries, their inability to unite, and he saw his opportunity. Through means that are still unclear, likely a swift and bloody coup, he seized power in Kish. But he didn't just want to be the next Lugal of Kish. He built his own new capital city, Akkad, or Agade, a place that became so legendary that its exact location has still not been found by archaeologists. From this new base of power, he set out to do what no Sumerian king had ever done before: conquer all of Sumer, and then keep going. Sargon's army was different. He learned from the Sumerian model, but improved upon it. He combined the Sumerian phalanx with the more flexible tactics of his Akkadian people. Crucially, he introduced and popularized the composite bow, a powerful weapon made of laminated wood, horn, and sinew. It had a much greater range and penetrating power than the simple bows used before. An army of archers could rain death down upon a traditional Sumerian phalanx before it even got close enough to use its spears. You now stand on the walls of Uruk, the great city of Gilgamesh, but you are not looking out at the army of Umma. You are watching the approach of Sargon's host. They are led by Ligal-Zagizi, the same king of Umma who had recently conquered most of Sumer himself, creating a short-lived kingdom. He had united the cities by force, but Sargon was about to show him what real conquest looked like. In a series of massive battles, Sargon's army crushed the forces of Ligal-Zagizi and the allied Sumerian cities. The texts claim he fought 34 battles and was victorious in all of them. After his final victory, Sargon captured Ligal-Zagizi. In a brilliant act of political theater and humiliation, he brought the defeated king back to the holy city of Nippur, the seat of the great god Enlil. He put him in a dog collar and neck stock and paraded him through the sacred gate of the temple. This was a message to all of Sumer. Your greatest king is now my dog. I am the one favored by Enlil now. It was a brutal and effective piece of propaganda. Sargon's ambition was limitless. He wasn't content with ruling Mesopotamia. He marched his armies west of the Mediterranean Sea, the cedar forest of the Gilgamesh epic. He marched south to the Lower Sea, the Persian Gulf, symbolically washing his weapons in its waters to declare his dominion. He boasted of ships from as far away as the Indus Valley and Oman docking at his capital of Akkad. He had forged the world's first true empire. It was a vast, multi-ethnic, multilingual state held together by military might and Sargon's personal charisma. A quirky detail of his new administration was how he managed this diverse empire. He couldn't be everywhere at once. So he installed trusted Akkadian governors in the conquered Sumerian cities to ensure their loyalty. But his most clever move was what he did with his daughter. He appointed her as the high priestess of the moon god Nana at Ur, the most important religious post in the south. He gave her the Sumerian name Enheduanna. This was a masterstroke. It placed his own family at the heart of the traditional Sumerian religious establishment, co-opting its power and prestige. Enheduanna was not just a political appointee. She was a brilliant woman in her own right. She was a poet, and we still have her hymns to the goddess Inanna. In fact, she is the first author in all of human history whose name we know. The first known writer wasn't a king or a male scribe, but the daughter of an emperor, writing in a conquered language. Historians still debate the nature of Sargon's rule. Was he a unifier who brought an end to the destructive infighting of the Sumerian cities and ushered in an age of peace and prosperity? Or was he a brutal conqueror who crushed the unique cultural identity of Sumer under the heel of Akkadian military power? The truth, as always, is complex. He brought stability and fostered immense trade, making the region wealthier than ever before. But he did so through overwhelming force. The Sumerian cities, with their proud histories and patron gods, did not take kindly to being ruled by an Akkadian outsider from a new, upstart city. Sargon and his sons who succeeded him would face constant rebellions. The king of the world would spend most of his reign trying to hold his new world together. The idea of empire was born, but it was an idea that would have to be constantly reforged in blood and fire. The world you are in has been fundamentally altered. The old loyalties are gone. If you were a citizen of Ur, your primary allegiance was once to the moon god Nana and the Lugal of Ur. Now you are a subject of an emperor who lives hundreds of miles away in the magnificent, and to you foreign city of Akkad. Your local Lugal has been replaced by an Akkadian governor who speaks a different language and answers to a distant master. The empire that Sargon built brought stability, but it was the stability of a prison yard, not a playground. You walk through the streets of a Sumerian city, say Lagash, under the new Akkadian administration. On the surface, much looks the same. People still go to the temple of Ningirsu. Farmers still work the irrigated fields, and merchants still haggle in a marketplace. But there's a new layer of authority superimposed on everything. You see Akkadian soldiers, with their distinctive helmets and powerful composite bows, garrisoned in a newly built fortress that dominates the city. They are a constant, visible reminder of who is in charge. They are here to enforce the emperor's will and, more importantly, to collect his taxes. Sargon and his successors, most notably his grandson Naram-Sin, revolutionized administration. To run an empire, you need more than just soldiers. You need bureaucrats. And the Akkadians, building on Sumerian scribal traditions, created a highly centralized system. They standardized everything. Weights and measures were made uniform across the empire to facilitate trade and taxation. A new system of dating was introduced, where each year was named after a significant event in the emperor's reign, like the year Naram-Sin conquered the city of. This was a form of propaganda, turning the calendar itself into a record of the king's glory. The Akkadian language replaced Sumerian as the official language of government. All official documents, tax records, legal contracts, royal decrees, were now written in Akkadian cuneiform. While Sumerian was still spoken by the people and used in religious contexts, remember in Hejuana's hymns, the language of power was now Akkadian. Young, ambitious Sumerians wanting to get ahead in the world would have had to learn the conqueror's tongue. It's a subtle but powerful form of cultural assimilation. A mainstream historical fact of this period is the economic integration the empire created. With the roads safe and the old city-state rivalries suppressed, trade flourished on an unprecedented scale. A merchant could now travel from the shores of the Persian Gulf to the mountains of Anatolia without having to cross a dozen hostile borders. The empire became a single, massive economic zone. This brought immense wealth, but most of it flowed north to the capital, Akkad. The Sumerian cities were no longer the masters of their own destiny. They were production centers for the imperial heartland. They grew the grain, wove the textiles, and then watched as the tax collectors carted it all away. This inevitably bred resentment. The old Sumerian cities, with their centuries of pride and tradition, chafed under foreign rule. Rebellions were constant. Every time an Akkadian king died, the empire would erupt in a great revolt as the Sumerian cities tried to reclaim their independence. Sargon's sons and grandsons had to spend much of their reigns reconquering the empire their father had won. The emperor who best represents the zenith of Akkadian power and its incredible arrogance was Naram-Sin. He was Sargon's grandson and a brilliant military commander. He crushed the great revolts and expanded the empire to its greatest extent. But he wasn't content with the old titles. He gave himself a new one, king of the 4 quarters of the world. And then he did something truly shocking. He declared himself a god. This was a radical break from Mesopotamian tradition. Sumerian kings were agents of the gods, their servants. Naram-Sin claimed to be a god himself. On his famous victory stele, he is depicted as a divine figure, wearing the horned helmet previously reserved only for gods. He's shown ascending a mountain, trampling his enemies underfoot, a muscular, perfect being, literally climbing to heaven. A quirky detail of this self-deification is how it was reflected in legal documents. Before Naram-Sin, oaths were sworn in the name of the gods. During his reign, people had to swear oaths in the name of the god-king Naram-Sin. It was the ultimate loyalty test. To break such an oath wasn't just perjury. It was blasphemy against a living deity. It's a move of supreme confidence, but also supreme hubris. Historians still debate whether this deification was a calculated political move to unify his diverse empire under a single cult of the divine ruler, or a sign of megalomania that ultimately alienated his subjects. Later Mesopotamian legends certainly viewed it as the latter. They created a story, the Curse of Akkad, which blamed the eventual fall of the empire directly on Naram-Sin's arrogance. In the tale, Naram-Sin, in a fit of rage because the great god Enlil won't grant him favors, attacks and plunders Enlil's sacred temple in Nippur. This is the ultimate sacrilege. Enlil, in his fury, unleashes a new people, a barbarian horde from the mountains, to destroy Akkad and avenge the crime. As you stand in the conquered city, you can feel the simmering anger beneath the surface of imperial peace. The wealth of the empire is impressive, the new roads are safe, but the cost has been your city's freedom. The old gods seem to have been pushed aside by this new, self-proclaimed god-king in Akkad. The people mutter the old proverbs and wait. They believe that pride on this scale cannot go unpunished. The gods will not be mocked forever. And as they look to the Zagros Mountains on the eastern horizon, they see the first signs of a storm gathering. The curse is coming. The divine arrogance of Naram-Sin hangs in the air like the calm before a storm. The Akkadian Empire, for all its power, has a fatal flaw. It is held together by the force of a single, charismatic ruler. After Naram-Sin's long and successful reign, his successors are weaker. The constant rebellions in the Sumerian south intensify, bleeding the empire of soldiers and resources. The delicate machinery of imperial control begins to break down. And then, from the Zagros Mountains to the east, the storm that the curse of Akkad prophesied finally breaks. They are a people about whom we know almost nothing. The Sumerians and Akkadians call them the Gudians. They are described in the texts not as a rival civilization, but as a force of nature, a plague. One scribe writes, "They are people who know no order. They have the intelligence of a dog, the features of a monkey." This is, of course, propaganda written by the defeated, but it gives you a sense of the sheer terror and contempt the Mesopotamians felt for these invaders. The Gudians were likely a semi-nomadic, tribal people from the mountains, driven from their homeland by famine or internal conflict, who saw the rich, decadent, and now politically fractured plains of Mesopotamia as an irresistible target. You are no longer in a bustling, orderly city of the Akkadian Empire. You are huddled with a group of refugees behind the crumbling walls of what was once a prosperous town. The imperial soldiers are gone, recalled to defend the heartland or defeated in battle. The central authority that guaranteed safety has vanished. Law and order have collapsed. You peer through a crack in the wall and see a Gudian warband looting a nearby farmhouse. They are not a disciplined army like Sargon's. They are a chaotic swarm, fast-moving and utterly ruthless. They don't have siege engines or complex tactics. Their primary weapon is terror. They sweep across the land, burning what they can't carry, enslaving whom they can, and disrupting the one thing upon which Sumerian life depends, the irrigation system. A mainstream historical fact is that the Gudian invasion did not immediately replace the Akkadian Empire with a new Gudian Empire. They didn't seem interested in administration. They were raiders and warlords. They toppled the existing power structure and then ruled over the wreckage, primarily through extortion. A Gudian chief would dominate a region and demand tribute, but he didn't build new temples, repair the Grand Canals, or foster trade. The sophisticated bureaucratic state of the Akkadians simply disintegrated, plunging Mesopotamia into a period that historians often call a dark age. The complex network of irrigation canals, the lifeblood of Sumer, falls into disrepair. Without a central government to organize the massive labor required for their upkeep, they become choked with silt and weeds. Fields that were once green with barley turn back into barren dust or salty marshland. Famine becomes a constant threat. The long-distance trade routes that brought cedar from Lebanon and lapis from Afghanistan collapse. The lights go out all over Mesopotamia. Life becomes intensely local and defensive. People abandon the smaller, undefended villages and flee to the larger walled cities that can still offer some protection. The population shrinks. Literacy plummets. When your primary concern is finding your next meal, and avoiding getting killed by raiders, there is little time or resource for training scribes to write poetry. The production of luxury goods, monumental art, and great literature largely ceases. The cultural energy of the past centuries simply evaporates. A quirky and rather sad tidbit from this period is what happened to the legendary city of Akkad itself. After it was sacked by the Gudians, as the curse foretold, it was so thoroughly destroyed and abandoned that its location was lost to history. To this day, despite countless texts referring to its glory, archaeologists have not definitively identified the ruins of Sargon's magnificent capital. It's the Atlantis of Mesopotamia, a ghost city, a testament to how completely a civilization can be wiped off the map. Historians still debate the true extent of the darkness of the Gudian period. Was it a complete collapse of civilization, as the Sumerian scribes writing after the fact made it out to be? Or was their rule more of a loose, decentralized overlordship, with some of the old Sumerian cities, particularly in the south, managing to maintain a degree of autonomy and cultural continuity? The city of Lagash, for example, seems to have experienced a period of relative prosperity under a ruler named Gudian, who appears to have been a vassal of the Gudian kings. We have numerous statues of Gudian depicting him as a pious, peaceful builder who piously requested permission for his Gudian masters to rebuild the temples. This suggests that the reality was more complex than a simple narrative of barbarian destruction. The Gudians may have been less like a tidal wave and more like a pirate syndicate, content to let local businesses run as long as they got their cut of the profits. You live in a world of fear and uncertainty. The grand imperial experiment is over, a failure. The stories of Sargon and Naram-Sin are now just tales of a lost golden age, whispered by old men. The future is a fog. For over a century, the land is dominated by these foreign warlords from the mountains. It seems as though the glory of Sumer has been extinguished forever. But deep in the south, in the old proud cities that remember their history, a flicker of the old spirit remains. They are biding their time, waiting for a leader strong enough to drive out the invaders and reclaim their land. A final, brilliant flash of Sumerian independence is about to ignite, a renaissance born from the ashes of the Dark Age. The fog of the Gudian Dark Age begins to lift. The mountain warlords, never skilled administrators, have grown complacent. Their loose confederation is weakening. In the south, the old Sumerian cities are stirring. The catalyst for the final act of Sumerian independence comes, once again, from the great city of Uruk. A king named Utu-Hengol rises up and, in a decisive battle, defeats the last Gudian king, Tirakan. The poetic text celebrating this victory describes Tirakan being captured ignominiously, his feet put in stocks. The barbarian yoke is broken. But Utu-Hengol's reign is short. Power quickly shifts to his governor in the city of Ur, a brilliant administrator and general named Ur-Nammu. Ur-Nammu doesn't just take over. He establishes a new dynasty, the third dynasty of Ur, and in doing so, he sparks a brief but glorious period known as the Sumerian Renaissance. This is Sumer's last great flourish, a final defiant statement of its cultural genius before it fades into history. You are standing in the rebuilt city of Ur, and it is more magnificent than ever before. Ur-Nammu is a builder, not a conqueror in the mold of Sargon. His goal isn't to create a vast, multi-ethnic empire through brutal force, but to unite the Sumerian heartland, Sumer and Akkad, into a single, well-run, peaceful state. His reign is characterized by a revival of Sumerian language, religion, and culture. It's a conscious look backward, an attempt to restore the perceived purity of the time before the Akkadian and Gudian interruptions. The most visible symbol of this renaissance is the monumental construction project that dominates the city, the Great Ziggurat of Ur. While ziggurats existed before, Ur-Nammu builds one on a scale and with a level of engineering sophistication never before seen. You watch as thousands of laborers work on the immense structure. It's a solid mass of mud brick, but its outer layer is a shell of millions of baked bricks, far more durable and water-resistant, all set in bitumen mortar. A mainstream historical fact is that this ziggurat was not just a pile of bricks. It was a sophisticated architectural achievement, with advanced features like weeper holes built into the structure to allow moisture to escape from the massive core, preventing internal water damage. 3 monumental staircases converge on a gatehouse at the first level, creating a stunning visual approach for religious processions. At its summit, there would have been a temple, the bedchamber of the moon god Nana. Ur-Nammu is not just building a temple. He is restoring the proper relationship between humanity and the gods, a relationship he believed the arrogant Akkadians and ignorant Gudians had broken. Under Ur-Nammu and his son, Shulgi, the state becomes a marvel of bureaucratic efficiency, in some ways even surpassing the Akkadian model. The kingdom is divided into provinces, each managed by a governor. A vast army of scribes, the Dubsar, manages every aspect of the state economy. We have recovered literally hundreds of thousands of cuneiform tablets from this period, and the vast majority are not epic poems, but administrative records, receipts, tax rolls, labor assignments, inventories of state-owned cattle. It's the most documented period in early Mesopotamian history. It was a command economy, where the central state controlled almost all productive land and resources. In the midst of all this state building, Ur-Nammu gives the world one of its most important innovations. He creates the world's first known law code. While we call it the Code of Ur-Nammu, it's not a code in the modern sense of a comprehensive legal system. It's a collection of legal precedents set down by the king to ensure justice and uniformity throughout his land. The prologue to the code is a beautiful piece of royal propaganda. Ur-Nammu declares that he was chosen by the gods to establish justice in the land, to banish malediction, violence, and strife. His goal, he says, is that the orphan should not fall prey to the rich, that the widow should not fall prey to the powerful, that the man of 1 shekel should not fall prey to the man of 60 shekels. The laws themselves are fascinating. A quirky tidbit is their preference for fines over corporal punishment. Unlike the famous eye for an eye principle of the later Code of Hammurabi, Ur-Nammu's laws are surprisingly lenient. If a man knocks out another man's tooth, he pays 2 shekels of silver. If he cuts off his foot, he pays 10 shekels. It's a system of monetary compensation, not physical retribution. There are laws for divorce, for regulating witchcraft accusations, and for dealing with runaway slaves. It's an attempt to create a just and predictable society, governed by written laws, not the whims of powerful men. Historians still debate the true purpose of this law code. Was it a genuine attempt at social justice, as the prologue claims? Or was it primarily a tool of statecraft, a way to demonstrate the king's authority and create a stable, predictable environment for the state-controlled economy to function smoothly? Was Ur-Nammu a social reformer, or just a very, very good CEO? The answer is probably both. A just society is a stable society, and a stable society is a profitable one for the state. For a few decades, under Ur-Nammu and his successor Shulgi, it seems as though the Sumerian dream has been reborn. The canals are repaired, the fields are fertile, the temples are rich, and the land is at peace, protected by a strong army and governed by just laws. Scribes are once again composing hymns and copying the old epic tales like that of Gilgamesh, preserving them for posterity. It is a golden age of order, prosperity, and cultural revival. But this new, tightly wound, centralized state has its own vulnerabilities. It is a bureaucratic machine that requires constant fuel and perfect conditions to run. And on the western horizon, a new threat is gathering, a slow but relentless migration of a new group of people that will bring this final Sumerian kingdom to its knees. The glorious Sumerian Renaissance under the third dynasty of Ur feels solid, permanent, and divinely ordained. The great ziggurat gleams under the Mesopotamian sun, a symbol of stability. The state's granaries are full, its bureaucracy is a well-oiled machine, and its king, for a time, is even deified like the Akkadian rulers of old. But the intricate system is brittle. It depends on a steady stream of resources from its provinces and absolute control over its territory. Now, a new pressure begins to build, not from a conquering army this time, but from a slow, creeping migration. From the west, from the Syrian and Arabian deserts, a new group of Semitic-speaking peoples, the Amorites, are pushing towards the fertile lands of Mesopotamia. The Sumerians call them the March-Tu, a name that carries connotations of a coarse, nomadic lifestyle. One Sumerian text describes them dismissively: the March-Tu, who know no grain, who digs up truffles on the steppe, who does not bend his knees to cultivate the land, who eats raw meat, who has no house during his lifetime, who is not buried after his death. This is the prejudice of a settled, urban civilization against nomadic pastoralists. The Amorites are not a unified army seeking conquest. They are clans and tribes, pushed by drought or population pressure, seeking new pastures for their flocks. They begin to infiltrate the kingdom, some settling peacefully, others raiding towns and disrupting trade routes. To counter this threat, the king of Ur-Shusin builds a massive wall, not around a single city, but a defensive wall stretching for over 170 miles between the Tigris and Euphrates, north of the capital. It was called the Wall to keep the Amorites out. It was a monumental undertaking, a kind of Mesopotamian Hadrian's Wall, designed to seal off the Sumerian heartland from these nomadic incursions. But like many such walls throughout history, it ultimately failed. The Amorites simply went around it or trickled through it. The wall was a hugely expensive symptom of a deeper problem. The state was overextended and struggling to control its own borders. At the same time, another pressure point emerges. In the east, in the old lands of Elam, modern-day Iran, a new power is rising, one that has long been a rival of Mesopotamian kingdoms. They see the growing weakness of Ur and begin to attack its eastern provinces, cutting off vital supplies of trade goods and tribute. The empire of Ur is being squeezed from both sides, a slow migratory pressure from the west and direct military attacks from the east. The intricate state bureaucracy begins to falter. Famine strikes. We have desperate administrative texts from the final years of the kingdom showing provincial governors reporting that they cannot meet their grain quotas for the capital. Prices for basic commodities skyrocket. One tablet records that the price of grain shot up 60-fold. The command economy, so efficient in times of peace, collapses under the strain. Provinces begin to break away, their governors declaring independence, hoarding their resources for their own people. The kingdom of Ur starts to disintegrate from within. The final blow comes around 2004 BC. An army from Elam, allied with factions from inside Sumer, marches on the capital. The city of Ur, weakened by famine and political chaos, is unable to mount an effective defense. It is sacked, burned, and utterly destroyed. The last king of Ur-Ibi-Sin is taken away to Elam in chains, a tragic echo of what Sargon did to his rival Ligilzagizi centuries before. The third dynasty of Ur, and with it the last independent Sumerian state, comes to a catastrophic end. This time, there is no quick recovery, no new dynasty to rise from the ashes. This feels like the end. The destruction of Ur left a deep psychological scar on the Mesopotamian psyche. It was commemorated in a remarkable genre of literature, the city lament. These are long, poetic compositions that mourn the fall of a great city as if it were the death of a beloved person. The most famous of these is the lament for Ur. You are a survivor, sitting in the smoldering ruins of the once great city. The great ziggurat is damaged, the temples are defiled, and the streets are filled with the dead. A scribe, in a quavering voice, recites the lines of the lament, giving voice to your despair. The poem describes the goddess of Uruk, Ningal, weeping for her home. My city has been destroyed. My house has been destroyed. Oh, you are my city of sighs, I weep for you. The lament details the horror. In its streets, where the feasting crowds would mill, there lay the dead. In its places, where the festive ceremonies were held, the people lay in heaps. The poem blames a divine decision. The gods Anu and Enlil, for reasons of their own, decreed that the age of Uar was over. The city's destruction is portrayed not just as a military defeat, but as the withdrawal of divine favor, the end of an era. This is a mainstream historical fact. These city laments are a unique and powerful form of literature that blended grief, history, and theology to process national trauma. Historians still debate the primary cause of Uar's fall. Was it the external pressure from the Amorites and Elamites? Or was it the internal fragility of its over-centralized economic system? Or was it, as some have argued, long-term environmental degradation, a gradual buildup of salt in the irrigated fields that slowly poisoned the land and reduced crop yields? The answer is likely all of the above. It was a perfect storm of political, military, economic, and environmental crises that brought the magnificent structure of the Sumerian state crashing down. As you sit in the ruins, listening to the mournful chant, you realize this is more than the fall of a city. It's the end of a people, at least as a political force. The Sumerians will never again rule their own land. Their language will slowly fade from everyday use, surviving only as a classical and religious language for scribes, much like Latin in medieval Europe. A quirky, poignant fact is that the language of the world's first civilization effectively died out, becoming a linguistic fossil. The future of Mesopotamia will belong to the Amorites, who will establish new kingdoms, like the one that will rise from a small town called Babylon, and to other Semitic-speaking peoples. But the ghost of Sumer, its culture, its gods, and its inventions would haunt this land and the world forever. The smoke has cleared from the ruins of Uar. The laments have been written. The Sumerian people, as a distinct political and ethnic group, have vanished from the stage of history. They have been defeated, assimilated, and absorbed into the new rising powers of the Near East, primarily the Amorites and later the Babylonians and Assyrians. If the story ended here, it would be just another tale of a lost civilization, one of many that rose and fell in the ancient world. But the death of Sumer was not an ending. It was a transformation. The physical body of Sumerian civilization was gone, but its ghost, its powerful ideas and innovations, lived on, shaping the cultures of its conquerors and, through them, the entire world. You are now in the city of Babylon, centuries after the fall of Uar. The language spoken on the street is Akkadian, the language of the Amorite dynasties. But you step into a scribal school, and what do you hear the students chanting? They are painstakingly copying and reciting Sumerian texts. They are learning the Sumerian language, not to speak it, but as a classical language of religion, literature, and law. It holds the same prestige that Latin or classical Greek would in later Western civilization. To be an educated person in Babylon means to know the ancient tongue of Sumer. The scribes are copying the Epic of Gilgamesh, ensuring that the story of Uruk's great king will survive to be read thousands of years later. They are copying the hymns of Enheduanna, the law codes of Uar-Nammu, and the city laments. The literature of the Sumerians became the foundation of Mesopotamian literary culture. This is the most direct and powerful way their spirit endured. Now walk into the great temple of Marduk, the chief god of Babylon. Look at the rituals being performed by the Babylonian priests. They are incredibly similar to the rituals you witnessed in the temples of Uruk and Uar. The practice of divination, of looking for omens in sheep livers, that quirky but essential part of Sumerian religion, is still a core practice. The pantheon of gods has been rearranged, with the Babylonian god Marduk now at the top, but most of the old Sumerian gods are still there, living on under new Akkadian names. The Sumerian goddess Inanna is now the beloved and feared Ishtar. The wise god Enki is now Ea. The pantheon was not replaced. It was rebranded. The fundamental stories, like the creation of humanity to serve the gods and the tale of the Great Flood, were retold and adapted, but their Sumerian core remained intact. This flood story, first recorded by the Sumerians, would eventually find its way into the Hebrew Bible in the story of Noah, becoming one of the most famous stories in the world. Let's look at the law. A Babylonian citizen has a legal dispute. He goes before a judge, who consults a great stone stele set up in the center of the city. This is the famous Code of Hammurabi. It's more detailed and, in many ways, harsher than the Code of Ur-Nammu with its famous eye for an eye principle. But the very idea of a king proclaiming a public written set of laws to establish justice and order in his kingdom is a direct inheritance from his Sumerian predecessors. Hammurabi didn't invent the concept of a law code. He perfected a Sumerian one. A mainstream historical fact is the profound Sumerian influence on the development of astronomy and mathematics. The Babylonians were brilliant astronomers, creating detailed star charts and developing the ability to predict eclipses. But the mathematical system they used was a Sumerian invention. It was the sexagesimal system, a base 60 counting system. We're not sure why the Sumerians chose 60, but it was a brilliantly flexible number, divisible by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10, 12, 15, 20, and 30. This made calculations with fractions much easier. And we today have inherited this Sumerian system. It's the reason we have 60 seconds in a minute, 60 minutes in an hour, and 360 degrees in a circle. Every time you check your watch or use a protractor, you're using a mathematical ghost from ancient Sumer. It's a quirky and profound legacy hiding in plain sight. The technology of the Sumerians also lived on. The wheel, of course, continued to roll across the ancient world. The practice of irrigation, the very foundation of Mesopotamian life, continued according to the principles they first established. The art of writing in cuneiform on clay tablets, the medium the Sumerians pioneered, would continue to be used in the Near East for another 2,000 years, adopted by dozens of different cultures to write many different languages. Historians still debate the extent to which Sumer's conquerors were conscious of their dead. Did a Babylonian scribe feel a sense of connection to the long-dead Sumerian author whose work he was copying? Or was it simply the classics, the ancient and revered foundation of his own culture? It's likely the latter. The Sumerians weren't a memory of a specific people. They were the very bedrock of civilization itself. Their culture was so foundational that the people who inherited it probably didn't even think of it as belonging to someone else. It was just the way things were done. Sumer was like a supernova. The civilization itself collapsed and died, but the explosion scattered its essential elements: writing, law, religion, mathematics, and storytelling across the ancient world. These elements became the building blocks for the empires that followed: Babylon, Assyria, Persia. And through them, particularly through the cultural transmission of the Greeks and Hebrews, these ancient ideas trickled down through the centuries to form part of the foundation of our own world. Sumer is all around us. But for a very long time, the ghost had no name. The world remembered the stories but forgot who first wrote them down. The source itself was buried and forgotten, waiting for a new kind of explorer to find it. For more than 2,000 years, Sumer slept. The world remembered Babylon and Assyria. The ancient Greeks wrote about them, and the Hebrew Bible was full of their stories. But the original wellspring of that Mesopotamian culture, the Sumerians themselves, were completely forgotten. Their language was unreadable, their cities buried under huge mounds of earth and sand, their very name erased from human memory. If you had asked a scholar in the 1700s who invented writing, They might have said the Egyptians or the Phoenicians. No one would have said the Sumerians. They were a historical ghost story without a name. The rediscovery began in the mid-19th century. The land of Mesopotamia, modern-day Iraq, was then part of the Ottoman Empire, and it became a place of intense interest for adventurous European diplomats, military officers, and explorers. They were drawn by the biblical connection, searching for the ruins of Nineveh and Babylon. These early explorers, men like the Frenchman Paul-Émile Botta and the Englishman Austen Henry Layard, began excavating the massive mounds, or tells, that dotted the Iraqi landscape. They weren't trained archaeologists in the modern sense. They were treasure hunters, looking for magnificent sculptures and museum pieces. And they found them, shipping giant winged bulls and stunning bas-reliefs back to the Louvre and the British Museum. In the process, they also uncovered vast libraries of cuneiform tablets. At first, no one could read them. The wedge-shaped script was a complete mystery. The story of its decipherment is a detective story in its own right, a process that took decades and involved the brilliant work of several scholars. A key breakthrough came from the Behistun inscription, a massive rock carving in Iran that was commissioned by the Persian king Darius the Great. The inscription was a proclamation of his victory, written in 3 different languages, all using cuneiform script: Old Persian, Elamite, and Babylonian, a later form of Akkadian. Scholars were able to decipher the Old Persian script first. Because it was a trilingual inscription, saying the same thing in 3 languages, they could use the Old Persian as a key, a kind of Rosetta Stone for cuneiform. They could now read Babylonian Akkadian. This was a monumental achievement. A mainstream historical fact is that this decipherment opened up the entire written history of Mesopotamia. For the first time in millennia, the voices of Sargon, Hammurabi, and the Assyrian kings could be heard again. But as scholars translated more and more of these Akkadian tablets, they noticed something strange. There were certain texts, particularly very old religious and literary ones, that seemed to be written in another, even older and more mysterious language. The scribes themselves often included glossaries or interlinear translations, as if they were studying a dead, classical language. They called this language Imgur, which we translate as the native tongue. It was clearly not a Semitic language like Akkadian. It was something else entirely, something more ancient. This is where a French scholar named Jules Oppert, in 1869, made a crucial intellectual leap. Based on the title king of Sumer and Akkad, used by many Mesopotamian rulers, he proposed that these mysterious, non-Semitic people, the original inventors of cuneiform, should be called the Sumerians. At first, the idea was highly controversial. The academic world was rocked by a fierce debate. Some scholars refused to believe in the existence of this phantom, pre-Akkadian civilization. The idea of a lost culture, more ancient than any previously known, seemed fantastical. The debate was finally settled by the archaeologists. As excavations became more scientific, moving beyond mere treasure hunting, archaeologists like the American team at Nippur and, of course, Leonard Woolley at UR began to dig deeper. Below the layers of Babylon, below the layers of Akkad, they found them. They found the cities of Uruk, Eridu, and Lagash. They found tablets written only in this strange, ancient language. They found the distinctive pottery, the ziggurats, the statues of figures with wide, pious eyes. They uncovered the royal tombs of UR, revealing a culture of breathtaking sophistication and wealth that predated Sargon's empire. A quirky and poignant detail of this rediscovery is how it mirrored the Sumerians' own sense of their past. Remember the Sumerian king list, which spoke of a time when kingship descended from heaven at Eridu. The archaeologists found that Eridu was indeed one of the oldest settlements. The myths that had been dismissed as fanciful tales were suddenly found to have a real, historical foundation. The ghost finally had a name and a local habitation. The recovery of Sumerian history in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, was one of the greatest intellectual adventures of the modern era. It was like discovering that the Romans didn't invent their culture, but inherited it from a much older, forgotten civilization called, say, the Atlanteans. It fundamentally rewrote the opening chapters of human history. It pushed the timeline for the invention of writing, the city, and the law back by thousands of years. We suddenly had a new first civilization. So you are standing now, not in the dust of ancient Iraq, but in a modern museum gallery. Before you, behind a pane of glass, sits a small, pillow-shaped clay tablet. It's covered in those neat, wedge-shaped marks. It might be a receipt for goats, a schoolboy's exercise, or a fragment of the Gilgamesh epic. It is quiet, unassuming, and one of the most important objects in the world. It's a direct message, a whisper across 5,000 years of silence. From the people who first looked at a hostile, muddy swamp and saw the possibility of a city. The people who, out of a need to count sheep, invented literature. The people who built and fought and dreamed and were forgotten and were found again. The Sumerians. Their story is over, but by finding it, we found the true beginning of our own. And now, as our long journey through the rise and fall of the world's first cities comes to a close, allow the echoes of this ancient world to gently fade. The clamor of Uruk's busy street softens, the solemn chants from the ziggurat at Ur dissolve into the quiet of the night, and the dust of forgotten empires settles once more. The great kings and demanding gods, the ingenious scribes and tireless farmers, all recede back into the deep well of time from which they came. Their struggles and triumphs, which once felt so immediate and vital, now drift away like figures in a dream you can only just recall. The weight of millennia gently presses them back beneath the sands, leaving behind only the faintest whisper of their passage, a whisper carried on the number of seconds in a minute, in the ghost of a story, in the simple revolutionary idea of writing things down. There is nothing more to strive for, nothing more to discover tonight. All the work has been done, all the battles have been fought. The story is complete, and now all that is left is the deep and well-deserved peace of rest. Let the soft background hum of the fan be the gentle current of the Euphrates, lulling you into a calm and profound sleep. There is only stillness now, only quiet. Sweet dreams, and the twilight of Sumer, the mighty ziggurat stood tall, but hollow, symbols of a world unraveling. Once the cradle of civilization, the cities of Uruk, Ur, and Lagash began to crumble under the weight of their own creation. Political chaos, relentless warfare, environmental collapse, and betrayal from within fracture the foundation of the first great human empire. As rival kings turned against one another and the gods seemed to fall silent, rivers dried, crops failed, and famine swept through the land. Foreign invaders, Akkadians, Elamites, and Gudians, descended upon weakened cities like vultures. The very people who once invented writing, law, and organized religion faced annihilation. What happened to the people who built the first cities? Why did the knowledge that changed the world vanish almost overnight? In this chilling conclusion, we uncover the forgotten warnings etched in cuneiform tablets and ask the haunting question: did the Sumerians fall, or were they erased?